So I want to welcome Matt Williams from Whittle Flame in Oxfordshire. Thanks very much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about how you light a charcoal barbecue.
Sure thing. Great thing for us to do because it takes both our products, doesn't it? So obviously you want to take the lid and the grill out of the way of your barbecue. One of the first problems people cause themselves when they light a barbecue is covering the whole area with charcoal.
Okay, yeah.
Just going to stick a bit of charcoal in really just on one side of the barbecue.
Yeah.
Once this is lit, it's going to burn really hot. And the problem people generally have, the whole thing people talk about with British barbecue is like a sausage that's black on the outside and still completely raw in the middle. And that's because you're trying to work off one temperature. And you'd never do that if you're cooking inside. So the real key to barbecue and cooking with fires is actually learning how to control the temperatures that you're working on. So I've got heat zones. If I'm cooking a sausage, it starts spitting out fat and it's flaring up. It's all right, I just move it away from my hot zone into a cooler zone. And once you put the lid onto this kettle, like this will sit at 180, 200 degrees for hours actually with that amount of charcoal in it. So you don't have to be grilling directly over the fire all the time. And you're just cooking on a usable heat source then.
And the other thing I noticed, when you lit the flamer, you put the flamer not covered at all. Why is that then?
Right, I just find when I cover them in, you don't get enough air in. It doesn't combust all that fully. If you're letting it burn really nicely and fully with loads of air supply, the heat from the flamer will light this charcoal really, really, really easily.
Any other advice you'd give for beginners?
When I see people who are getting into barbecue, one of the first things they do is go and hit up their local butcher and spend fortunes. But actually thinking about the first ingredient that you've got, which is your charcoal and your fire, that's just the best thing that you can be investing in. So buy the best quality charcoal you can find. Ideally, it'd be British, wouldn't hurt if it was Whittle Flame. But get a good quality charcoal, not something that's instant lighting, ideally not something that comes from one of the most deforested countries in the world, something like that. And actually the difference that's going to make to the flavour you get off your food is incredible.
I don't quite understand the difference between different charcoals. What is the major difference?
So there's one that we can see right now. So I think most people are used to the idea that you light your barbecue up and then it smokes like mad for about half an hour and then eventually the charcoal starts to catch fire. And you can be like nearly an hour between putting a lighter to your charcoal and being ready to cook. Well, you'll see there's no smoke coming off of this. This is very, very pure charcoal. And a lot of the reason that you get that in other charcoals, so I'm taking a piece of wood, Nick, and I am reducing it in weight by 75% to make a nice piece of charcoal. And I can completely understand why it's quite tempting not to take that process all the way through, because everyone buys charcoal by weight. And you'll see like a 4-kilo bag of our charcoal is about the size of bag that you'd get for 10 or 15 kilos of an imported tropical hardwood charcoal. And that's not because they have to be like that. It's because you're selling by weight. Why would you make it lighter unless you were particularly interested in making a really good product? So that's one of the major differences is this has been taken to a very specific temperature in a very specific amount of time to make it a very, very clean burning, pure charcoal. And whether you're an expert, whether you're starting from scratch, actually that just gives you the tools you need to be able to cook something which people are actually going to enjoy.
It's really interesting you say that actually, because it's the sort of same principles with kiln dried wood. Yeah. We sell by volume. Because we're drying it right down to about 10 or 12% and it's giving more heat energy. So the principles you're saying is almost the same, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely the same. Really, what we're trying to do, the pair of us, is sell a good quality fuel that does the job that people expect it to when they get it home. And I think, that's the basis on which both our businesses work.
Okay, so Matt, we've lit the barbecue now. What's the sort of next stages before we actually get to cook on it? And what sort of timings are we talking about?
So timings wise, I always think it's about 7-8 minutes to go from putting a firelighter in this to being ready to cook. We've got nothing to put on straight away, so I'm going to set it so it's ready for us to come back to. So I've got the grill on, the lid on, and to light it, I had the vents on the bottom of the barbecue fully open, so all the air was coming through. Now it's all really nicely ignited, we can turn that right down so it's ready to come back to. We'll just pop the vent about 3/4 closed on the bottom, about 3/4 closed on the top. Now, I won't put it out, but when we're ready to come back, the fire will still be going strong and we'll be ready to start grilling.
Fantastic. Let's go and have a little chat about your business and more about charcoal.
Nice.
So tell us a little bit about Whittle Flame and how it all started.
Sure. Whittle Flame is now, I suppose, about 4.5 years old, so still a bit of a baby, but not quite my first rodeo. So I've been making charcoal for about 15 years. And for me, this has been a process. So 15 years ago, I used to live in Oxford University's research woodland, where I first made charcoal a very traditional way, where you just set fire to wood, cut the oxygen down and let it turn into charcoal. Whilst I was halfway through my first burn, a professor came wandering out of one of the little research rooms and just gave me a 4.5-hour lecture about why it is that I shouldn't be doing the thing that I was doing. So he sort of explained to me a little bit of the chemistry of what happens when you set wood on fire or when you make it into charcoal. The process is the same, and about what you might want to think about if you wanted to make a charcoal that wasn't just the most polluting thing that you could possibly do with a piece of wood. And really, 15 years worth of trying to figure out how you do that without releasing huge amounts of methane and acid and tar into the atmosphere has kept me pretty entertained. And we're getting there now. I mean, no one wants to try and say they're perfect, but we have made every effort that we possibly can to make sure that our process is as friendly to the environment that we're trying to protect, as it can be.
Just talk us through how you actually make charcoal.
So our process now goes like this. If you imagine that you were a piece of wood turning up in my yard, the first thing that would happen is you'd be cut into a log, similar situation to what you have here. All that wood goes into a dryer. Now, our dryers are nothing like as efficient as yours, Nick. I am very jealous of those. But it takes us a week to dry enough timber to produce charcoal for the following week. So we're using heat recovered from our charcoal system to dry that wood before it goes in. The wood then goes into a cassette, slides into our kilns, and then that wood is heated up to a temperature which I'd love to be able to share with you, but then I would have to kill you, and that would be unfortunate. But it's a pretty high temperature, and it's the temperature at which wood would definitely be on fire if there was any oxygen. Yes, really the key is to make sure no oxygen gets into that process. And then the wood will break down in exactly the way that we're seeing it here. So you've got very complex long chain hydrocarbons all being broken by heat, and they're becoming gas, and they're becoming oil, and they're becoming some aqueous liquids as well. And then all the black stuff you can see in the fire here, that's charcoal. Everyone makes charcoal, just not necessarily on purpose all the time.
And how long is the whole process from going into the kiln to coming out as charcoal?
So it varies a bit on species. We always make single species charcoals because you get a nicer result, but I could get ash through that kiln in maybe 6 or 7 hours. Oak might be a bit more like 8-9 hours. Generally what we do is we run our kilns twice a day. So they'll start first thing in the morning. As soon as they're finished, we can take the made charcoal out, push a new cassette in, press the on button, and it runs then through the night for us, so it's ready the next morning.
I always sort of struggle to understand the difference between different types of charcoal. There's lumpwood, there's briquettes. Just talk us through the difference so everybody understands those fundamental differences.
So lumpwood charcoal, that is just made from a virgin timber. So, you cut a tree down, hopefully dry it for a while, make it into charcoal. And the piece of charcoal, ought to be looking like a piece of wood. I have a couple here, Nick. This is a piece of ash charcoal. You can still see part of the bark and the growth rings are all there. A piece of lumpwood charcoal ought to look like a lump of wood, but black and very, very light. And then you also have briquetted charcoal. So briquetted charcoal is generally made from charcoal that's been ground to powder, and then any number of other ingredients that you might want to stick in to bulk that out. 15 to 20% charcoal is about average for a sort of supermarket pork briquette. And you'll find there's sawdust in it. You'll find there's quite a lot of lime in it. When people talk about light your charcoal and leave it to go white hot. My God, your charcoal is never going to go white hot, not before that you've melted your barbecue and there's a pile of metal on the floor. But what that is the lime that's been put into that briquette, producing a white ash so it looks like a clean, beautiful thing to cook on, regardless of what you've put in it. Not all briquettes are the same, if I'm honest. We do make a briquette ourselves. So you can see this is a sort of a compressed charcoal briquette, and we make this actually by compressing sawdust and compressing it to a temperature and pressure where the lignin inside the wood, so lignin is the bit of wood that holds its structure together, allows trees to grow tall, but if you melt it, it will remember a new structure. So that's what we do with this, and then we can put it through our very gentle charcoaling process and come out with a briquette, this will burn for about 4.5 hours on an open fire. And if I put a lid on a barbecue, 3 or 4 of these, and I can be cooking for 18 hours. So if you want to do a whole brisket or something, quite show-offy on the barbecue, these can really be your friend.
And which species is your favourite? Which is best, would you say, for making charcoal?
People ask me that all the time, Nick, and if I'm completely honest, my answer is generally whatever I have most of. So at the moment, I'm sure that you will be noticing the effects of this as well, but the woodlands around us are, being heavily affected by ash dieback disease. So at the moment, what we're trying to do is get those trees out whilst there's still, there's still value in them and turn them into a product. So probably at the moment, I would say about 80% of the lumpwood charcoal that we produce is ash, because that's what we've got a lot of. And really, the whole premise of what we're doing here is to put value into British woodlands. Now, you will hear me talk every now and again about how we like to import charcoal from the most deforested countries in the world. And one of the things that people don't often point out is that actually the UK is one of the most deforested countries in the world. And if we don't push value into our woodlands, then actually they're not going to exist. And this is not about exploiting or over-extracting from woodlands. It's about the wood that's been harvested has happened in a sustainable way. We haven't taken more wood from a forest than it can grow back again. And we apply that principle to all of our sourcing.
Matt, why would I choose Whittle Flame charcoal over popping down to my B&Q and buying from there?
I would hope that the very first thing that you would think when you used it is that the quality is just a world apart. There are lots of reasons for that. Mostly it's the process that we use to make the charcoal, which makes it very, very consistent, incredibly easy to light and very easy to control. So a charcoal like ash, which really wants to be on fire and wants to burn really hot. Now, if you were to give that enough air supply, famously, you could use it to smelt iron. But if you cut that air supply right down with little vents on your barbecue, it'll actually stay ignited at 100 degrees. So the scope of range of temperature in that, is quite incredible. Also, we only ever make charcoal in single species. So a bag of charcoal will either be ash, beech, oak, thorn, what have you. Ash charcoal will burn at about twice the temperature of oak charcoal. So if I had those mixed together in a bag and you were trying to cook some nice piece of fish or something delicate on the barbecue, you wouldn't stand a chance with half of it is burning at twice the temperature of the other half. So it's those really beautiful little subtle differences that make it a perfect heat source for cooking.
What are the other factors that would make me choose to buy British over imported?
Sure. Do you know what? We're getting really to the point of why I'm even a charcoal maker. So when I'd started to understand about the impact of the charcoal industry around the world, that was what kind of drove me to say that I wanted to start a UK charcoal company. A little more than 10% of global deforestation every year is just exclusively for the charcoal industry. It's not to say that there are no good quality charcoals and no sustainable charcoals made anywhere other than the UK. Of course there are, but actually what arrives in our supermarket is going to be exploitative of people, of forests, and of our environment.
Okay, so certainly Wood and Whittle Flame were both two businesses very passionate on British firewood and British charcoal. We're both members of the Grown in Britain scheme. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Grown in Britain, it's a delightful little thing. We all know about marks like FSC, PEFC, which are sustainability marks for timber, but none of them were particularly relevant to the kind of forestry that we have in the UK. And when Grown in Britain came along, it did a really nice thing. So we all have to work within Forestry Commission guidelines in the UK. Like it's virtually impossible to be cutting a tree down without having had that signed off into a great big management plan. Grown in Britain piggybacks on that. So every year, what we do is we have to show exactly the amount of timber that we bought. We have to show where we bought that from. We have to show that we know what the management plan number from the Forestry Commission was for that timber to be felled. And then we have to show what our ratio of producing charcoal from wood has been through the year, so that everyone can be absolutely certain that the amount of charcoal that we've sold, we've bought the corresponding amount of wood from those certified, backed up and audited sources that we get our timber from. Now for me that is particularly easy because that's pretty much one forest. We are an estate with a woodland that has not been particularly well managed for a very long time, and what we do as a company is basically buy whatever timber is produced from the good management of that woodland. We'll give that a value, we'll buy it and make it into a product. All of that fits very neatly under the Grown in Britain umbrella.
For us here at Certainly Wood, sustainability is really important to us as to how we actually produce our firewood, not just the buying of the wood, but the sustainability of production. How do you operate your process in a similar way?
again, for us, it's fundamental to what we do in the same way as it is for you, Nick. Sustainability is a funny thing, isn't it? I feel like 10, 15 years ago, sustainability was what the world was aiming for. Like, we can't even sustain the thing that we're doing anymore, Nick. You know, this has to be about regenerating. And when you look at the amount of tree planting going on in the UK at the moment, I can't see a clear route to what the use of that wood is going to be. And it's companies like ours who are putting value into that and thinking about what's going to happen to those trees. If you let a forest just grow and all the trees fall over and rot, I mean, that's a lot of methane that you're producing. You know, it's not a carbon sink at that point. Actually supporting our homegrown forestry, making sure there are viable, economically viable ways of that getting to market to be products that we would otherwise be buying from much less sustainable sources, and certainly, you know, suffering from the consequences of having to move those things thousands of miles to get to us. The biggest problem that we have to cope with charcoal making is that, unlike the beautiful fire burning in front of us here, in charcoal making, you generally don't set fire to any of the things that would be a flame in wood. So our process starts exactly like that. We're heating wood up with no oxygen. It just produces huge volumes of wood smoke, I guess people would think of it. And now if we just pump that into atmosphere, for every ton of charcoal we made, we'd be putting 3 tons of pollution straight into the air. So a lot of our focus is about how you stop that. So what we do actually is we cool all of the wood smoke down, and it's quite alarming volumes of liquid that you recover at that point. So it turns out for every 100 kilos of charcoal I make 125 litres of a product called wood vinegar. So that's like the aqueous vapor that you get in wood smoke.
Is that little bottle?
It is. Yeah, that's right. Now this is, like, for the UK, quite a new product, but in actual fact, it's something that I think that pretty much everyone knows about. They just don't know why something is happening. So this is produced in every fire. Every time that you burn wood or any sort of woody product, this will get made. It contains 300 or 400 little enzymes and replicated hormones that trigger, after a wildfire, an entire landscape to regenerate itself. So it's promoting seeds to grow, roots to grow deeply, to get below scorched earths. Anything which is still alive, it is triggering to produce really nutrient-dense seed so that you've got the most viable seeds to grow. But actually being able to just capture it and have it in a little bottle, you can use all of those natural effects, the triggering effects of wood vinegar on your garden. We're selling a lot of this now into the regenerative agriculture movement. So we can replace an awful lot of farm inputs which were coming from, you know, real heavy oil-based industries into farming with something which actually we just collect as a kind of byproduct to making the best charcoal in the world.
So Matt, I know you are a massive fan of our natural firelighters, but why are they so special versus other firelights people can buy?
All the time that I've had a charcoal company, I've always sold flameless firelighters alongside our charcoal. It's incredibly important for me because actually we go to a lot of effort to make sure that the charcoal we produce has a beautiful little wood-based flavour note to it, you know, it's not got those horrible paraffin smells that you get with charcoal quite often. And you can ruin it entirely, you know, if you use one of those little white cube firelighters with our charcoal, as it's burning and as it's producing vapours, the charcoal just sucks it in. It filters everything that it can come across and it will pull that paraffin into its structure. So the whole time that you're cooking over that charcoal, which we have made very beautiful for you, you're still just going to get that paraffin flavour coming back. So I want to do everything I can to avoid anyone putting one of those firelighters on my fuel. And the flamers, honestly, like one flamer, I think normally it's 7 to 8 minutes, lighting a flamer, sticking it onto the charcoal, and I'm ready to cook. And I couldn't ask for more than that.
We love sitting around a fire. And what do you think makes it so special for people sitting around a fire and cooking on charcoal?
You're absolutely right. And it's one of the most beautiful things, isn't it, about working in the industry that we're in. And I think, do you know what, I don't want to be too fancy about it, but for me, it's an evolutionary thing. Like, we would not be the creatures that we are with the capacities that we have if we hadn't learned how to master fire. And, you know, if you imagine, I was talking earlier on about wood vinegar and that it has enzymes and hormones that act on plants and on fungi and bacteria, and also on human beings. So as soon as you have the aroma of a wood fire around you, it triggers a reaction that changes your physical state. So we spend a lot of time in our modern busy worlds being in fight and flight response. So sort of high adrenaline, ready to go. It's not very good for us, you know, it's not been very good for our mental health. But this is one little place where you sit, you light a fire, as soon as those vapors start to come, everything in your body will be trying to change your physical state to what we would call rest and digest. Actually means that you take more nutrient from the food that you eat when you're in that physical state. It takes testosterone levels down, that puts you in a very calm and physically comfortable state, which is not surprising because if you imagine, in our kind of evolutionary past, coming back to the fire was coming back to safety, to security, to nutrition. And the fact that, that we've evolved alongside fire being the most vital part of an ecosystem for us as human beings, it doesn't surprise me that actually we're just drawn to this. And it was just beautiful to find there is a little scientific hook that you can pin that in. There is a genuine chemical reaction that happens, but wants to calm you, relax you, make you feel like the world is all right.
What's your favourite thing to barbecue?
Interesting, isn't it? Because there are obviously loads of real big show-offy things you can do on a barbecue, and I don't really do those very often, to be honest. But I cook on a barbecue probably 5 or 6 times a week at home. Sometimes that'll be bacon and lasagna. But I guess things people think of as being traditionally barbecue-y, of course I love, a nice big steak over a fire is probably about my favourite thing. Perhaps a bit of chimichurri on the side, but not much in the way of flavourings, I think beef, fire, that's a combination that's well worth coming back to over and over again.
Takes some beating, doesn't it? Do you know what my favourite is? Burgers. So come on, let's go and like that.
Let's do it.
Now for the best bit. Cooking. What would be your sort of best tips for cooking on a barbecue?
So I reckon I've got 2. So the first one is about where you put your charcoal. So never cover the whole base of your barbecue with the fire because you have nowhere to go if things get out of hand. Give yourself that ability to have hot, medium, cool. The second thing is I would never cook on a barbecue without having a temperature probe with me. Okay. So often we mess food up on the barbecue because we've either undercooked the middle of it or wildly overcooked it to try to compensate for not poisoning our guests.